In 1944, American bombers were flying over the Balkans, targeting German oil fields and military facilities. Many of these aircraft were hit by enemy fire, some lost engines, others caught fire, and crews were forced to parachute out over Yugoslavia, deep in territory controlled by the Germans. For the airmen, landing in enemy territory meant survival was uncertain. They had no clear rescue plan and no way to contact Allied forces. If German patrols found them, they would likely be captured, imprisoned, or even executed. But instead of falling into German hands, many of the downed Americans encountered help from an unexpected source. Local Serbian villagers and members of the Chetnik resistance, led by General Draža Mihailović, began sheltering them. These villagers fed them, hid them in houses and barns, and protected them from German patrols that searched the countryside. This was extremely dangerous. If the Germans discovered that locals were helping Allied soldiers, entire families and villages could face severe punishment. Yet the villagers continued to take the risk. They shared what little food they had and treated the wounded, showing remarkable courage and humanity in the middle of war. For the stranded American airmen, it was the first sign of hope in a situation that had seemed hopeless only hours before. Chapter 2. A bold plan takes shape. As more and more American airmen were taken in by villagers and Chetnik fighters, a new problem appeared. There were now hundreds of Allied soldiers trapped deep inside German-held territory and no clear way to bring them home safely. Moving them overland toward the nearest Allied lines was nearly impossible. German patrols, roadblocks, and constant surveillance made the journey too dangerous, and any large movement of men would surely be detected. News of the situation eventually reached the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the American wartime intelligence agency operating out of Italy. The OSS began studying possible solutions, and one idea slowly emerged, an idea that seemed risky, almost unrealistic, but also the only real chance of success. Instead of trying to move the airmen to safety, what if the Allies came to them? This plan would require building a secret airstrip in the mountains of Yugoslavia. Transport aircraft would land, pick up the stranded men, and fly them out directly. However, this meant constructing a runway in open fields surrounded by German forces without machinery, under complete secrecy, and with no guarantee that the enemy wouldn't discover it. Yet the Chetnik resistance was willing to attempt it. Under the guidance of local commanders, fighters and villagers began clearing a plateau near the village of Pranjani. They cut trees, leveled ground, removed stones, and shaped the field by hand. It was taxing, slow, and dangerous work, but the volunteers understood the importance of what they were doing. Every day the Germans continued searching for hidden Allied personnel. Patrols moved along nearby roads, and airplanes sometimes passed overhead. If the runway was discovered, the consequences would be severe, but the work continued, carried out with determination and secrecy. By late summer, a rough but functional airfield began to take shape, quietly marking the beginning of one of the most daring rescue operations of the Second World War. Chapter 3. The rescue begins. By early August 1944, the airstrip near Pranjani was finally ready. It was far from perfect, just a long stretch of cleared grass and soil on a mountain plateau. But it was long enough for transport planes to land and take off. Now the next challenge began. coordinating a rescue mission deep inside enemy territory without alerting the Germans. Through radio contact with Allied commanders in Italy, a date was set. On the night of August 10th, 1944, the first rescue aircraft would attempt to land. The villagers and Chetnik guards kept watch from the surrounding hills, listening carefully for German patrols and aircraft. Meanwhile, the stranded American airmen waited quietly in forests and farmhouses, unsure if the plan would succeed. When night fell, the sound finally came. Engines in the sky. 3 C-47 transport planes, escorted by fighter aircraft, crossed toward the hidden airfield. The pilots had no navigation lights, no beacons, and no airfield markings to guide them. All they had were small lamps and hand signals on the ground, briefly lit and then covered again to avoid detection. Despite the darkness and the risks, the first plane touched down safely. Within minutes, dozens of American airmen ran from the tree line and boarded. There was no time for long goodbyes. The plane turned and lifted back into the night, carrying the first group of rescued men toward Italy. More flights followed, landing and departing quickly. The operation had begun successfully, without a single gunshot or alarm raised. For the villagers and resistance fighters watching the lights fade into the sky, it was a moment of relief and pride. They had helped return the first of many Allied soldiers to safety, and the mission was far from over. Chapter 4. Night after night. With the success of the first evacuation flights, Operation Halyard shifted into full motion. Word quietly spread among scattered groups of downed airmen, and small teams began moving through the countryside toward Pranjani. This movement had to be handled carefully. German patrols were everywhere, and even one captured airman could reveal the operation under interrogation. The Chetniks organized guides who led the Americans along mountain paths, through forests, and across fields, always avoiding main roads. Villagers continued to provide food and shelter, sometimes giving up their own limited supplies to keep the airmen hidden and healthy. Every person involved understood that one mistake could bring German forces down upon the entire region. Meanwhile, the OSS arranged more transport planes from Italy. Almost every rescue flight took place at night when visibility was low and German aircraft were less active. The C-47 transports flew without lights and landed using only small, shielded lamps on the ground, illuminated for a few seconds at a time to guide the pilots, then covered again immediately. Each landing followed the same pattern. The plane touched down quickly. Airmen boarded without delay. The aircraft turned and took off again, usually within minutes. Whether it was 10, 20, or 30 men at a time, the system worked. No alarms were raised, and German forces remained unaware of what was happening right under their control. Over the weeks that followed, the number of rescued Americans grew steadily. Flights continued, sometimes several in a single night. In total, hundreds of airmen reached the valley, waited for their assigned flights, and then disappeared into the darkness, homeward bound. For the Chetniks and villagers, exhaustion was constant, but morale remained strong. They were witnessing something extraordinary. a large-scale rescue operation carried out in silence and secrecy, right in the heart of enemy territory. Every successful takeoff was a victory, not just for the Allies, but for the people who risked everything to make it possible. Chapter 5. A mission completed. By late 1944, the rescue operation had continued for several months. Hundreds of American airmen had reached Pranjani and been flown out safely. Each successful flight strengthened the belief that the impossible had been achieved. A large-scale evacuation behind enemy lines, carried out with no losses and without the Germans discovering the true scale of what was happening. When the final rescue flights were completed, the number of airmen saved had reached more than 500. For many of these men, the mission meant a second chance at life, an opportunity to return home, resume their military service, or simply survive a war that had nearly ended for them in a remote field in Yugoslavia. As the final groups departed, villagers and Chetnik fighters watched from the hills just as they had on the first night. They did not celebrate loudly. They could not. German patrols were still nearby, and the danger had not disappeared. But among them was a quiet pride. They had carried out one of the most remarkable rescue operations of the war, armed with nothing more than determination, resourcefulness, and a belief in doing what was right. But history did not immediately honor their efforts. After the war, Yugoslavia came under new leadership, and many of those involved in helping the Americans were portrayed as enemies of the new state. General Draža Mihailović, who had led the Chetnik resistance, was arrested, tried, and executed. For decades, the story of Operation Halyard remained largely unknown outside the United States military archives and the memories of the men who survived because of it. Still, the rescued airmen never forgot. Many stayed in contact with the families who had sheltered them. Others returned to the region in later years to thank the people who risked their lives to save them. In time, the truth slowly resurfaced. The operation is now remembered as one of the most successful and courageous rescue missions of the Second World War. A mission carried out by ordinary villagers and resistance fighters who chose humanity over fear, and whose bravery sent hundreds of Allied soldiers home alive.